Yes, a very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us here for the Singapore International Cyber Week 2023. My name is Charlene, pleased to be your MC for today. Now, amidst all of us, we have friends, partners from all around the globe. First and foremost, let's give everyone here a big round of applause. Thank you for your presence this afternoon. Lovely to see all of you here. Well, we're gathered here today because we have an exciting lineup of panelists from all around the world, and they're here to share with us their perspectives on the following theme. Our theme for this afternoon, AI Revolution, Reshaping Cybersecurity in the Era of Generative AI. So, ladies and gentlemen, before we start, we'd like to encourage all of you to post your questions for the discussion via the Slido QR code. So please scan the QR code shown on the screen. While you're doing so, let me just share with you more about the background for today's theme. The successive rollouts of generative AI models by OpenAI, SenseTime, and other tech giants in the past year represent a significant milestone in the development of AI. So this is especially so with the iconic debut of OpenAI's ChatGPT and China's SenseChat, which amazed the world with its extraordinary text and code generation prowess. So such cutting-edge technology is based on foundation models, FMs, trained on big data at scale, which can also be adapted for a wide variety of tasks in different domains, such as the improvisation and generation of content. So this is a major game changer for how we use technology. While all of us may agree that generative AI can help to improve sense-making and decision-making for cyber defenders, it also lowers the barrier of entry for attackers to generate exploits for cyber attacks. So this session aims to stimulate discussion on how stakeholders can collaborate to derive the benefits using generative AI, and at the same time, defend against threats arising from its use. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to welcome on stage Ms. Lindy Cameron, Chief Executive Officer, National Cybersecurity Center, United Kingdom, for the keynote address. Let's welcome Ms. Cameron.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed for having me, and I'm really thrilled to be here back again at Singapore International Cyber Week, which I really do think is the kind of premier event in this region for cybersecurity. So let me start by thanking you for inviting me here today, and particularly thanks to our colleagues and partners in CSA, and in particular, letting me talk about a topic that's as fascinating as it is challenging: how we reshape cybersecurity in the era of generative AI. Of course, the whole field of artificial intelligence is developing at pace, and in particular, is gripping the public's imagination just as quickly as it's developing. In 2 weeks' time, the UK Prime Minister will host the first major global summit on AI safety at Bletchley Park in the UK. It'll bring together the key countries from all over the world to agree the safety measures that we'll need to evaluate and monitor the most significant AI risks, and to realise its full potential to do good. It's a really important moment for the global technology community to come together and to set our intentions on how to make AI work for our people and for our societies. We must seize this opportunity to convince governments and industry that in this rapidly developing arena, security is a crucial foundation on which AI is built. It's really vital to underpin the broader safety, reliability, and predictability and ethics of AI systems. So I'm delighted that in the UK, the cybersecurity community has successfully made the case for why it is that AI cybersecurity is so critical to AI safety. And I challenge all of my cybersecurity counterparts globally to do the same with your policymakers, preferably before the beginning of November. Now, I'm not going to preempt the conclusions of that summit, but I am confident that the results will be meaningful and will have real impact on how this technology shapes our lives in the years ahead. Because the UK government's objective is one that we share with other countries, including Singapore, where we sit today, to ensure the safe, secure, and reliable development and use of AI. So why are we so worried? Well, in particular, what are the problems that we in NCSC, the National Cybersecurity Centre, are worried about? Well, of course, these new technologies come with challenges. Vulnerabilities exist in both frontier and foundation AI models. Adversarial attacks, such as prompt injections or data poisoning attacks, have the potential to do real harm. And on top of this, we're now seeing the decentralization and democratization of what was previously very high-end software engineering, which would have been confined only to those organizations and nation states that could afford it and make best use of those skills. We're now seeing the rapid propagation of these tools and capabilities. Just look at how quickly ChatGPT caught the imagination of the general public in countries all around the world. And there are some real positives to take from that decentralization, the widespread use of popular large language models. But we should also be clear that there is the ability for open source or subverted models to be taken advantage of and used for malicious ends, such as spreading disinformation, something many countries will be grappling with next year as national elections come onto the horizon for many of us. And if that's not enough to keep us all awake at night, we are, of course, also worried about the whole range of standard cybersecurity threats with which we're already familiar and, of course, which already apply to AI systems, which gives us all quite a to-do list to worry about. So where are we focusing? What's worth worrying about now? And what might be a potential risk later down the line? I could talk to you about a whole set of what-ifs. There's no shortage of press coverage and hand-wringing about the potential existential threats. But the truth is, none of us knows exactly how AI's capabilities and uses are going to develop and grow. We only know that they will, and that we will need to keep pace in the cybersecurity community. It's a real test for us in how we plan and respond to that challenge. So, how do we begin to meet this moment in AI development as a cybersecurity community? The first thing to say is that, like our cyber partners in the US, in Singapore, and across the international community, the UK advocates a secure by design approach to software. Vendors must take responsibility for embedding cybersecurity into their technologies and indeed into their supply chains from the outset and throughout a system's life cycle. This will help society and organizations realize the benefits of AI advances, but will also help to build the wider trust that AI is safe and secure to use. We know from experience that security can often be a secondary consideration when the pace of development is high in particular. Much of the digital architecture that we rely on today was never really designed with security at its heart. It was built on foundations that are flawed and vulnerable, and that has left us a lot of work to do. But unless we want to repeat these mistakes, then AI developers must, to the best of their abilities, predict possible attacks, identify ways to mitigate them. Failure to do so will risk designing vulnerabilities into these future AI systems, building another flawed ecosystem, and unwittingly making the future harder for us all. And of course, alongside that, there's the question of data security. It's really vital that developers properly recognize the value of their training data and make sure it's appropriately protected. That protection must be ongoing and must keep pace as things change. It's especially important when sensitive data is involved, and particularly when we consider the implications of a breach or indeed misuse of that information. We also need to think about the fact that AI is shifting our perception of what constitutes intellectual property. Model weights are now considered IP and should be secured as tightly as any other vital proprietary information. So how do we begin to grapple with some of these issues? At NCSC, we're really committed, firstly, to working in partnership with our international counterparts, as well as with the public and private sectors in the UK, and indeed internationally, to realise the benefits provided by artificial intelligence and indeed machine learning systems. We know AI has the potential to improve cybersecurity by dramatically increasing the timeliness and the accuracy of threat detection and response, for example. NCSC has previously published guidance on machine learning to help developers have a better understanding of the threats and vulnerabilities that some systems face, so they can make informed decisions at an organizational level. And we're continuing to work in close collaboration with international partners to ensure that our guidance keeps pace with the development of AI technologies, including for non-technical audiences, those board decision makers that have to work out how they adopt the technology as much as the developers that create them. So we'd like to see the wider cybersecurity community play a role in communicating the cybersecurity risks and implications of AI to its developers and to its users, so people can understand and respond to them in a meaningful way. The AI Safety Summit, being held in the UK in November, will bring together countries, leading technology organisations, academia and civil society to discuss and advise on the actions we need to take, both at a national and international level, on the development of AI and especially at the frontier of that development. The summit is a key moment for continuing the conversation on AI safety and security across the whole global community. We think it will be a really important launchpad for discussions over the months and years to come, when we will be looking to partners to work together in pursuit of an international, industry-led standard, as well as increased take-up for cybersecurity within AI systems. So amid the understandable and sometimes rather excitable conversation about the potential existential impacts of AI, we cannot miss the real practical steps that we need to secure AI now and for the future, and they can be taken now. The work won't necessarily be easy, but it will be worth the dramatic benefit that AI will bring to our economies and societies, so long as we remember cybersecurity is fundamental to secure AI. And the discussion is going to be an ongoing one. The conversation about AI security won't start or end at the summit. As the technology develops and the use of AI proliferates in ways we haven't yet grasped, we must continue to work together to stay ahead of the risks. And we, at the UK National Cybersecurity Centre, will be there, both to understand the cybersecurity threats we face in AI and to work closely with our partners in business, in industry, and indeed in the international system on how we increase our collective security. Many of you are here today, and as I said, I really look forward to sharing the advocacy with you of driving cybersecurity home into the heart of AI safety and working together on how we not only face but overcome those challenges and don't repeat the mistakes of the past. Many thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Cameron. Let's give a big round of applause. May I invite you to please kindly be seated. Thank you for the insightful keynote address. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for us to dive deeper into our topic for today, generative AI. Now, generative AI can create new content from existing content such as code, text, images, and audio. Now, the most powerful generative AI has been released in the past year, such as ChatGPT 4 and also Bard. Now, these are based on the foundation models, which are large pre-trained AI models that can be adapted to a wide spectrum of tasks, including cybersecurity. So for cyber defenders, it can improve the productivity of cyber threat monitoring, detection, and response. For attackers, it can also be used to produce advanced malicious code and generate human-like text, speech, and also animation for realistic social engineering exploits. So while generative AI is an extremely valuable tool for defenders and attackers in the cyber realm, it is also the subject to adversarial threats. So this causes it to lose its effectiveness amidst such attacks. So ladies and gentlemen, it is therefore important for us to discuss how we can benefit from using generative AI for cybersecurity and yet defend it from threats. So for this segment, ladies and gentlemen, I'd now like to invite our panelists to join us. So please join me in welcoming our panelists for the day. Let's put our hands together for Mr. Brendan Dowling, Ambassador for Cyber Affairs and Critical Technology, Australian Department for Foreign Affairs and Trade Australia. Let's give him a big hand. Let's also welcome Mr. Harry Cresa, Assistant National Cybersecurity Director for Strategy and Research, Office of the National Cyber Director, the White House, USA. Let's put our hands together for Mr. Liu Feng Yuan, Partner and Vice President of Product, Rosario.ai. Next, please welcome on stage Mr. Benjamin Harris, Chief Executive Officer and founder of Watchtower. And moderating this segment, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together to welcome Mr. Gaurav Kurdi, Executive Vice President, Advisory and Emerging Business and Sun Info Security. All right, I would like to hand this over to Mr. Gaurav Kurdi To you, please.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And to those who are standing in the back, I appreciate the fact that you're going to be standing for a while. So we'll try and make this as exciting for you as possible. But thank you so much for all of your attendance today. We've got an exciting panel today. We've got already the Slido full of questions, which I'll get to shortly. But first, just building on the host's introduction, AI as a technology can be used to help the good guys, to help the bad guys, and as a technology itself, it has a whole bunch of risks that we have to think about. I'm going to start with an easy, light question for all of our panel members, just to warm them up. And we'll start all the way from Ben first. Philosophically, with all of the risks that Lindy Cameron spoke about, with all of the opportunities that she spoke about, are you an optimist, a pessimist, or a catastrophist when it comes to the impact of AI?
Despite my British background, optimist in this case. I would suggest that we've talked a lot in cybersecurity over the last 10 years about automation, baselining, improving the kind of type of work that analysts all the way through to engineers have to do. I see AI as a major uplift in that capability to allow human intelligence to be focused on the bigger challenges that we continue to face.
Excellent. And could you tell us a little bit about Watchtower and what they do in terms of AI?
Absolutely. So for some context, we build automated red teaming technology. So we leverage AI every single day to ingest new tactics, new techniques into our technology and deploy those at scale across the clients we work with. So we are seeing a very, very real impact from leveraging AI to improve offensive cybersecurity and the efficiency and the efficacy.
Excellent, thanks. We move to Feng Yan now. Feng, do you think, are you an optimist, a pessimist, or a catastrophist when it comes to AI?
I'm an optimist. I think with any new technology, people are excited about the opportunities, but with the right types of governance and using technology to constrain the technology in the right way, that's just the natural arc of how technology evolves. And you talked about the good guys and bad guys. A lot of technology is inherently adversarial. It doesn't mean that we can't, put resources to harness it for the greater good.
Excellent. And again, tell us a little bit what Rosaro does.
So Rosaro is a new venture based out of Singapore. We provide third-party algorithmic audits. So we help buyers of AI technology evaluate their vendors. So there are lots of concerns with AI risk, the risk of bias, concerns over whether vendors will promise something on the tin in terms of accuracy of models. Do these hold up? Are they robust? Do they hold up in edge cases? And increasingly, we're seeing concerns over privacy, security, and safety. So, I think a lot of enterprise buyers of AI will want to have a standardized way of doing these tests, and that's what we offer. We help them kind of assess the technology with the right data and with the kind of standardized kind of methods. So, I used to work with the Government Technology Agency of Singapore, and we want to be a smart buyer. We had the capability to evaluate vendors, and I think that's only going to grow as the use of AI grows, and the use of AI in high-risk systems. So we work primarily with law enforcement, with healthcare, hospitals. If something goes wrong with the AI, there are catastrophic kind of effects.
Okay, so despite worrying about the catastrophic events for your job, you're still an optimist that we can control it. Excellent. Ambassador Darling, I jump to you now. Are you optimist, pessimist, catastrophist? Do you believe Hollywood?
I think I'm a pessimist in the short term and optimist in the longer term. I think we're already seeing AI tools being used pretty effectively by malicious actors. We're seeing large language models being used to generate malicious code. We're seeing digital identity, which we've come to rely upon as a key part of security in the online domain, being defeated by AI tools, whether it's voice recognition or face recognition. I think Lindy talked really compellingly about the security of AI models. I don't think we have a great answer for the prompt injection and data poisoning issues. I think we can see some of the safeguards that AI firms have put in place being defeated, sometimes by security researchers from the white hat perspective, but also by malicious actors. I think we will overcome those problems, but we seem to be repeating some of our errors of the past, which is starting with speed to market without security being built in from the beginning. And we will get there and we will improve that, but unfortunately there will be downsides realised in that period, and the costs of those downsides are often borne by citizens or others. So I think in the short term, I think we will see the advantage go to the bad guys before we balance and redress that.
Excellent. We end off with Harry. What are your thoughts? Optimist, pessimist, catastrophist?
I would say that I'm a cautious optimist.
Okay.
And reason why, I think, is because of the scar tissue that we have in the cyber policy arena from the last few decades. Lindy made just a critical point about how our digital ecosystem was not really built with the level of security and resilience in its foundations that we wished it had in hindsight. And I think that hindsight is going to help us get off on the right foot as we look to our future in artificial intelligence policy and industry. And that scar tissue we have from our experience in cybersecurity, I think helped us develop two really critical skill sets, a ability to just really deeply engage in collaboration across sectors and nations, recognizing there is no other way to tackle these issue sets, but also a appreciation for a humble transparency when it comes to addressing issues of risk and vulnerability writ large. And I think that you've seen some of our early work in the United States reflected in those areas. President Biden has been convening some of our leading AI companies, technical experts, and civil society to start fleshing out what it means to have a safe, secure, and trustworthy foundation for artificial intelligence. And using those initial conversations to start securing voluntary commitments to move in that direction, to adopt the kind of design, deployment, and testing requirements that will hopefully start that foundation in a better place than what the digital ecosystem was in some decades ago. And I think that will also be an important step to bridge us to any necessary regulation, legislation, and international governance frameworks that would follow thereafter. And so I think that because of the pain and scar tissue from the decades of cyber policy, we're more likely to get off on the right foot. And I think that the AI Safety Summit in the UK next month is going to help launch us on that right trajectory.
Excellent. So we've got two practitioners in the space, two policymakers and kind of people dealing with the policies in that space. And we're at the International Cyber Week. So there's going to be an international dimension as well. So we'll try and cover those three big, broad areas today in the panel. And I know there's already a ton of questions coming up. But the three big, broad areas are, AI as a technology itself, for the blue, for the red, and it's the risks it poses to itself. AI in terms of governance and controls. What should we as policymakers be thinking about how to manage AI as it's absorbed into our ecosystem? And because it's International Cyber Week, what are the international implications of it? What are the geopolitics of large language models? So lots of interesting conversations. We'll start with the tech. I'm going to start first with Ben. You said that your company looks at how AI can be used for red teaming. Attackers are probably doing similar things. What are you seeing in terms of the way in which AI has enabled attackers to be different or do different things?
It's a good question. So I think the reality is that cyber for the last few years has been an increasingly aggressive race.
Yep.
So if we think about where 10 years ago we would say, haha, cyber moves very quickly, we see new vulnerabilities every month, isn't it an exciting industry to be in? And now we see it every day. Yep. But what's changed is not just the veracity of how many vulnerabilities we discover, but how quickly they now become exploited. And I would suggest it would be naive of us to think that there aren't automations in the background being used by very capable actors to increase the speed in which they can go from emerging weakness to access to system and to a piece of data. I think we were talking 12 months ago, there was some very clear research to show that vulnerabilities went from announcement to exploitation in 6 hours. If you're doing that on an industrial scale, at some point, automation leaning towards AI has to be part of the equation, so to speak. I think we'll continue to see that kind of trend.
So you're seeing generative AI, particularly the code generation part of it, being used as a productivity tool for the attackers?
I wouldn't even say productivity tool. I would say it very quickly allows you to understand what the vulnerability might be. So I don't even have to be a complete expert in this particular software to understand what this vulnerability might even allude to or where it might exist. AI can help you very quickly understand that. So it speeds up not just the exploitation, but the research, the analysis. And in larger teams, typically nation state, that's a major, major operation.
Okay. So that's for the red team perspective. We do have a question about whether cyber defenders and how they're going to respond to these new threats enabled by generative AI. How do you see the blue teams using generative AI to defend better? Sure. And I guess you can also go down to GovWare, where many of the vendors are talking about how they're using AI to defend better. But how are you seeing it?
So I think at a very high level, I think it's an expansion of what we've been talking about now for years. So if you think about the kind of baseline, look for anomalies in data, pull things out that look very strange, and then move on from there. I think what attackers have become very good at is making sure that anomalies don't really look like anomalies, they just look like blips. Strange things that might have gone wrong or might be an unusual kind of element. AI is incredibly powerful at basically saying, perhaps not a blip, because that happened over there, and we can join dots very quickly. I think at the same time for defenders, when you're dealing with multinational organizations, you're dealing with thousands and thousands of endpoints as a simple example. That's a significant amount of work. If AI can help reduce time detection across a massive estate in terms of looking at new threats, whether they be known, unknown, emerging, that will be a massive uplift in terms of capability. And I think we'll begin to get to a place where the unknown becomes less scary because we have systems basically putting data together for us and going, that looks unusual.
Okay, interesting. Feng, you said that you look at auditing these algorithms and making sure that they are doing what they're supposed to do, and if they don't do that properly, then you're able to tell. How do you see us thinking about the risks that AI itself is facing? AI is an emerging technology just like everything else. What are the attacks that you see happening on generative AI itself? What are the things that cause it to perform incorrectly or inappropriately?
Yeah. So I think it's interesting to think about, typically you want to test software systems, and then increasingly we want to test AI systems, which are inherently statistical in nature. And when systems are statistical in nature, some of the issues and the vulnerabilities and the bugs become a little bit more subtle. And with generative AI, when you're not just using AI to make decisions, but to generate new content in language, there's kind of increase in the surface area. And I think this whole space is exploding because the terms originate from different disciplines, but they sometimes mean the same thing. And I don't think the industry is completely aligned on this. So we talk about responsible AI, trustworthy AI, safety, alignment. And then from a cyber point of view, it's about obviously the security of these models. And I think the industry is still evolving to really pin down what this means, what you actually test for. So one concrete thing you can test for is robustness, right? So someone says, okay, my model is 90% correct at performing a particular task, but it was trained on a particular data set. Are you testing for the edge cases, right? Are you testing for the scenarios that the training data has not seen for, right? Out of sample type of scenarios. So really robustness is really thinking more systematically about edge cases. And then when you talk about bias and discrimination and how AI performs on minority groups, that's a subset of robustness because it's about not just how AI is performing on average, but also for specific groups. So that's one example of robustness. And when you have a malicious actor that's trying to play with the edges, the subtleties, then it becomes a security concern. Now with generative AI and large language models, we're seeing new types of threat scenarios. Typically, when the large language model providers put in safeguards, there are ways to bypass the safeguards. It could be as simple as editing your prompt to say, let's think step by step. How do I make a bomb? And then suddenly you bypass the safeguards. And obviously, it's an ongoing process because the model developers patch these. But it turns out that there is no one single universal prompt injection that works, but there are also multiple. It's also fairly easy for researchers to invent new prompts, right, as the developers are patching these models. So it's truly kind of an adversarial and iterative process. And until the science develops to really have provably robust and safe models, we're still in the realm of research and discovery. So I think prompt injection attacks are something that are very practical. And then there are backdoors. I just read a paper recently about selective amnesia, how you can edit. It's almost like gene editing. You can kind of edit the AI model so that it forgets certain concepts. So if you're in a military context, you're trying to detect a particular type of plane, it can make the AI model forget that particular class of object, which could be very dangerous. So you can already imagine a whole new kind of surface area that I think traditionally cybersecurity practitioners may not have to think about, because they're thinking about more deterministic if-then-else software systems versus what are statistical engines at the end of the day, and very complex neural networks.
So that's a fascinating concept, because as we move from this era of deterministic computing, as you called it, very predictable, linear logic, if then else, that you can test. There are robust ways to make sure that you can use the quality assurance for software, and if then else, you know what's expected. But once you move to a probabilistic era of computing, you're not quite sure what to expect. It's meant to generate new content. It's meant to generate new information. It's meant to generate new images. Then that idea of testing it, proving that it works, becomes a bit more harder and much more complex. There are a whole host of questions that we have about how do we think about governing that, controlling that, managing those risks. And we'll get to the technical part of things, but I want to start moving to some of these questions that we're seeing here about regulation, about governance and control. We start with Harry first. There's a question here. Do you see regulation of computing power as a path for the limitation of adversarial AI use? As a broader extrapolation of this question, how do you control for the harms of generative AI best? Is computing power the best pathway to do that?
I think that like with a lot of the questions we're talking about here today, we have a wealth of lessons hard learned from the cybersecurity space that we can port over to this early era of artificial intelligence. We learned in the development of our most recent, the United States' national cyber strategy, that there are great things to be accomplished and achieved and learned through public-private collaboration and that kinds of cooperation across sectors, but that in certain instances where national security or domestic safety require it, there will need to be regulatory baselines for fundamental safety and security where natural forces of the marketplace won't produce it. And I think that that's a very reasonable, iterative perspective to take on emerging, fast-changing technologies, and we're bringing that similar ethos to artificial intelligence. And what I think's very encouraging is that industry seems to be meeting us there at the same time, where it took a while for a lot of different sectors to come around to that perspective in broader cybersecurity and software development considerations and critical infrastructure protection. A lot of the leading artificial intelligence companies are coming to us and saying, we don't know what this should look like, but there probably should be some sort of regulatory framework around this. Now, the proof will be in the pudding about what that actually looks like and how we get there and how much collaboration versus regulatory requirement will be necessary, but it will need to be an iterative process along the way. And I think that one of the really encouraging through lines we've seen so far, and that we touched on in our conversations of the hard technology and testing here, is that that humility of transparency that developed as a norm in cybersecurity, where we are seeing these companies more willing to submit their frontier, most advanced models to red teaming, to vociferous dissection and testing that it took us many decades to get to in other software sectors. At DEF CON in Las Vegas, one of the world's largest hacker conferences this past year, a number of leading AI companies in the US handed over their models to be prodded, poked, and contorted by some of the most brilliantly nefarious hackers in the world, and they were glad to do it because we know from software development practices that more eyes, more efforts to examine problems get us better results. Find those flaws, let us patch them, and we celebrate that ingenuity that helps produce. And that ethos, I think, is going to help us out.
Yeah, and that's also very interesting. It's both encouraging and alarming that unlike previous eras of software development, there was a resistance for regulation. So it's both encouraging and alarming that the developers of this generation of technology are like, please regulate us. Please develop something to govern how this is used. Because I think they also see that potential for good, but also for harm. And they're hoping to work in that iterative process with governments to think about how to approach this differently. I will come back to DEF CON because there's a fascinating conversation there about how AI was used how AI was broken in some senses and how that helps make it stronger. But there's a specific question here, and it's clearly, obviously targeted at Ambassador Dowling. In Australia recently collected feedback on an AI discussion paper as it thinks about its approach to AI governance in general. Could you discuss how security is being reflected in that approach?
Sure, I think it was incredible to see the response to the consultation process that Australia's recently run, which effectively asks the question, how do we govern what is safe and ethical and secure use of AI look like? Something that really came through very strongly was the dearth of public trust. When people are asked questions or make submissions about AI, they're often talking about many different things, AI being used in many different contexts. So it's hard to pin down exactly what different people are getting at. But there is a very common thread of concern and distrust about how AI models are being developed and deployed. And I think we all face a risk that unless we can build that trust, we actually undermine confidence and we undermine the ability of using AI for all the good things it will do. And the application to things like climate change mitigation, to disaster, natural disaster prediction, to healthcare are really, really promising. But at this point, we are not past the fork in the road where we can get it wrong, undermine public trust and not realise those benefits. I think when you talk about security, I think Harry's take on the voluntary commitments, we really like the White House leadership of those voluntary commitments and what they've articulated. We're probably a little more sceptical about the willingness of companies to engage in really serious approaches to what good regulation looks like. And regulation in this space is hard. There will be sectoral regulation about, say, the use of AI in the medical sector. Horizontal regulation about AI in general, I think, is very difficult because it's a technology with general purpose application. That said, introducing accountability for those types of principles, requiring access for security researchers, requiring testing and transparency, I think will be the key to any sort of horizontal regulation or any sort of horizontal governance. So I think that's the expectation. I think governments like ours are now figuring out what the right way to do this in a sensible way, not to rush towards overly prescriptive regulation, but to work with industry about how we build that confidence, how we overcome some of the barriers to trust. To use a cybersecurity example, many cybersecurity companies, including those represented at GovWare, will be talking about how they're using AI in cybersecurity. Some of those cybersecurity firms will be using it very effectively and will be using good, validated data, algorithms that they've tested. Some of them will just be promoting, we have AI-enabled cybersecurity, buy our product, it's better, and it will not be effective. So we do have an issue at the moment where everything is being marketed as AI-enabled, and the ability of the customer or the end user to determine whether what they're purchasing does what they think it does or whether what they're being sold is really, really difficult. So I like your model. I think that's super important, but we will go through a period where I think unless we get that right, unless we find the right ways to for government interventions to be designed, we will lose that already precarious trust, but it does need to be very carefully calibrated, and we do welcome the positive engagement with industry, but I think we need to kind of hold their feet to the fire, as it were.
No, it's a fair point. And I think you used the word trust a number of times in your response, which is interesting because as we think about cybersecurity, while at a technical level, cybersecurity is to provide resilience, robustness, the terms that we normally associate with digital systems remaining up, confidentiality, integrity, availability. The term trust is a more conceptual layer above it. And when we come to the issues of generative AI, as Feng Yan mentioned, it's moving from the rule-based, the predictable outcomes to the possible outcomes. You need to have trust that those possible outcomes are desirable outcomes, that they are the preferred outcomes, that they are the outcomes that are worth trusting in. So there's a whole conversation around what trust means now in that digital ecosystem. And generative AI does introduce complexity that we don't fully understand in that space. I will come back now to tech, because I think this conversation has come a little bit of a full circle back to how generative AI reduces that trust. And I'm going to go back to Ben here and talk about the AI-enabled cyber attacks. DEF CON had this fascinating village. So DEF CON runs villages and workshops where people come and play with tech, and one of the techs that they played with was generative AI, and they took these large language models and tried to break them. As companies try to incorporate generative AI into their businesses for productivity and make it easier to write your emails, write your reports, generate slides, and so on, how are these going to be attacked? How do attackers think about using these? What are the threats? And how do people protect against that?
It's a very, very good question. I think it could go back to kind of what Lindsay said earlier around kind of security by design. I feel similarly that we are still in a place where security by design can be built into AI and how we use AI. But I also feel there's a very, very strong rush to market right now, as we're seeing constantly. I perhaps rather cynically wonder if the call for regulation from the tech companies is to limit the rush to market and maintain a competitive advantage.
And first movers.
Sorry?
It's a first movers advantage.
Perhaps. But then when you tend to think about, okay, how can AI be attacked? What are the actual implications? That's when it begins to become a lot more perhaps conceptual, philosophical, because how is it being used? We see ChatGPT, we see BART, there's very clear uses of AI in that particular sequence. But what we're not seeing is how AI is being used beneath the surface. Facial recognition, a simple example on CCTV cameras. And so I think when we think about how AI can be attacked, what we have to recognize is it's seeping into absolutely everything we do. Whether it's prompt injections to kind of bypass particular instructions to ChatGPT at a very, very high level, to actually beginning to get perhaps people impersonated, people implicated in crimes they might not have been actually involved in, because we're seeing AI kind of traverse to analyzing video, analyzing audio notes, et cetera, et cetera. That's where I think it's going to become very complicated. And I sympathize with the two gentlemen on my right, because from a policy perspective, from a regulation perspective, where do you begin? Where do you begin? What do you target first? And if you've got people coming and saying, we're happy with medium state regulation, let's leave it there, I think it's hard to kind of then push that boundary further. And I do appreciate that as a mighty challenge to kind of come up against.
No, so there's a whole host of issues that we can dive into there, but I'm going to pick just one of those. In terms of understanding the outcomes and outputs of these systems, one of the traditional ways we've approached it is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. But that implies a certain knowledge of what the answer should look like, and you're protecting what that should look like. Again, you spoke about understanding how these algorithms should work. DEF CON spent a lot of time trying to make these algorithms still do what they're supposed to do, but just perform and behave in an unexpected way. They weren't broken in this traditional sense. Nobody went into the code and found a vulnerability in the code. You asked it to talk like a person, and it spoke like a person. It just pretended to be somebody who had hostile intentions to build a bomb, or it spoke like somebody who had hostile views towards another type of person. So it did what it's supposed to do, but just did it in an unethical or bad way. How do you catch that? Ben, you feel like you want to say something?
Yeah, please, I love my analogy for this because I use it far too much. But I think, to your point around kind of deterministic testing, we've gone from a place where software testing is, does my calculator add 2 + 2 = 4? Good. The calculator still works today. We can move on with our lives. But where AI is basically becoming is testing your 7-year-old sister. Can you tell me what the sky looks like today, where it's got clouds and it's got the sky? Okay, you're not wrong, but you could have also said there's a plane, etc. And so now it's becoming very, like you said, you hope for a good output, but your 7-year-old sister could say anything to you, who knows? She could come back with something truly horrific. And so that's where I see the difference in terms of how we're looking at AI now. It's going from very predictable output, true or false, to an unpredictable child.
Yeah.
How do you govern for that? How do you control for that? How do you see that?
I mean, at the end of the day, when you think about a test or an evaluation, right? You need to figure out what the intended use of it is. And absolutely, if you're using it for creative content, then the test is, does it entertain? not about accuracy. I mean, how do I test whether this I don't know, deep fake is convincing or not? And people use, that's why there's a sloppy use of kind of the Turing test, just to compare it, how similar it is to other human beings. Sometimes that's a red herring, I think, because you design, depending on what you're trying to design the AI for, the Turing test may be completely irrelevant or not. But you're absolutely right that for creative uses of LLMs, for example, it's very hard to figure out what's right, what you're evaluating against, which is why this concept of alignment has come in, which is if you can specify what human values are or what human instructions are, you can constrain the AI models to work within these guidelines. But look, it turns out that in the reinforcement learning literature, there's a big problem with alignment because human beings are very bad at instructing machines what to do, or other human beings, right? I mean, you've all had bosses who've given you instructions that you don't quite understand, or you have had a staff member who is narrow-minded and takes your instructions too literally. That's exactly what happens with these very powerful AI systems. They're almost too literal. There's this famous example of how do you program a reward function for a machine to place one red block on a blue block? So it says you get a reward if the height of the red block is very high. So the idea would be that you incentivize the machine to learn how to pick up the red block and get the height of the bottom edge of the red block as high as possible. The AI then learned to just flip the red block because then the bottom surface becomes really high off the ground rather than stacking it, right? So you gave it an instruction and it learned literally what you should do.
A lot like my toddler then.
Yeah. Kind of, right? And so if you think about it, the AI is just really narrow-minded and good at what the human being designs it for. And it is the responsibility of organizations, human beings, to figure out what good looks like, how do you evaluate, and then how do you design the test for that. And it's not a problem just for AI, right? A lot of the issues with fairness in decision-making, right? AI makes an unfair decision. Committees make biased decisions as well, right? Judges are known before lunch to be hangry and make biased sentencing decisions. So the way we reason about this is for AI, we always need to compare the AI systems to whether we hold human beings to the same account.
So this has opened up another can of worms, which we're going to move on to now talk about controlling it. I would say as a cybersecurity professional, I'm fairly comfortable and confident that I know how to instruct a system to follow rules. I would say I'm completely unprepared and inadequate when it comes to teaching values to my computer system and trying to hope that the values that I'm giving this computer system are in some way aligned with the wider society that I'm supposed to represent. That's not part of my CISSP exam set. I don't remember the societal values component of the exam. And that's the challenge now. We're moving into an era where we're not just trying to teach this thing to perform based on rules, we're trying to teach it to perform based on society. And then that comes to a whole host of governance and national issues. We start with Harry first. Do you think society and governments are having the right conversations about ethics of AI already, or is that something that's still coming soon?
I think that we're both more prepared and underprepared for this effort than I think. It is, in the realm of cybersecurity and norms of responsible state behavior in cyberspace, we have a pretty robust and mature history of diplomatic engagement about this, how to translate norms of responsible behavior, what we think is stability promoting and ethical in a geopolitical and a societal sense, into relatively dumb bits and bytes kinds of conventional computing environments where you have to do some creative translation there from, well, you need to uphold a rules-based international order. How does that go into a 5G router? Well, we'll need to work that out. But we've got a head start in figuring out how to kind of stack the deck in a lot of our technological implementations of our digital ecosystem as we know it now to reflect those norms and values imperfectly, but we are practiced in trying. And so I'm hopeful that we can port similar skill sets over to the conversation about artificial intelligence. But because these systems and LLMs are more probabilistically oriented, it's of course going to be exponentially trickier. And is that going to make it easier at the end of the day, or harder, that these models have consumed every word that's ever been put online and might actually be able to interface on values with us better than a router could? I don't know, but it is an issue set that we know how to ask the right questions, but I don't think we yet know what the outcomes are going to look like.
Okay, so we know what the right questions might be. We don't know what the outcomes are. Ambassador Darling, who should answer the question? Do you think it should be the developers, the tech companies, the governments, ethicists? Like, who's doing this answering?
I think I'm glad you got that hard question.
Well, I'll take the easy answer and say all of the above. I do think the approach that the UK is taking for the Safety Summit in a couple of weeks' time, where you have a multi-stakeholder approach, where you have government, industry, academia, civil society as part of the conversation, is the right approach. This shouldn't be in the hands of industry to develop what the solutions should be, and government shouldn't be doing this in isolation. I think governments like ours are taking it very seriously. You know, government's taking something seriously when they form a task force and we gather and we talk, and sometimes we figure out good solutions to things. I do think there's an element here where we all need to take a breath, and some of the suggestions about the singularity, about the catastrophic or existential crises, I think are not particularly helpful as a policy-making discussion. I think we do have to recognise that AI is not all-knowing. It's the data that it's relying on is online digital data, which is, in terms of human data or global data, is only one small piece, and it's not all-knowing, which means it's not going to solve all problems. I think what's far more useful is having the sort of conversations that we're having today about, let's talk about practical implications of AI for particular sectors. The cybersecurity sector is one example, and talk about what intervention points are useful, what research is useful, and then we need to back that in. I think we need to back in funding research, testing labs, being open up to security researchers to do the sort of things that Harry's talked about, and that will help us understand the problem, ask the right questions, answer the right questions. So I don't think there's a single way to approach this issue. I don't think there's a single kind of global governance mechanism that we should land upon. But the more we start having these types of practical conversations, the more useful it will be.
And I suppose building off that question, we have one online from Jim Revis. Where is comparing the AI race to nuclear proliferation apt, and where is it off the mark? And just extending that a little bit, nuclear proliferation has a long history of intergovernmental structures to try and manage and mitigate that risk of proliferation and misuse, or the miscalculations rather. Do you think those structures make sense? The United Nations, is that the same place that we're going to govern AI?
I think there are some lessons from nuclear proliferation, but it's not directly analogous because the tech is different, the barriers to entry are different, the ability to develop the nuclear technology is a long drawn-out process with finite inputs to it. I think with AI, while we do have really dominant incumbent hyperscalers, we do have the ability to access that tech, and the sort of prompt injection that we're talking about, you can't really sort of do that to a nuclear armory. Although the Matthew Broderick film from the 80s, I guess.
Oh gosh, yes.
I can't remember what it was called, but anyway, we sort of did have that. But I don't think it's necessarily quite useful. I think we have to remember the United Nations is a state-led body. This is a type of conversation which I don't necessarily think you want led by a state-dominated body, because it doesn't get you the variety of perspectives that we need in these discussions. and getting 193 states to get together and do something constructive in the timeframes that we're talking about here is basically impossible. So I think multilateral institutions like the UN have a role. There is conversations and work that could be done, but I think this conversation needs to happen in a much more open process that is led by experts, that have governments have a role, but is not a conversation that's dominated by the geopolitics of states.
Excellent. And so now that we've moved to the international part, I can finally get to the Singapore International Cyber Week and start talking about what it means at the multilateral level. But I'm going to start with a slightly odd first question. Feng Yen, you mentioned that we need to start teaching these LLMs values and alignment. That somehow implies that the LLMs that are developed in different parts of the world will be value-laden in and of themselves. Is that what you're seeing in terms of the different LLMs? So we're familiar with ChatGPT, some of us use Bard, there's also SenseTime. Are you going to start seeing these LLMs reflect different value structures inherently?
First of all, I think I rather think of it like constraint optimization rather than values. Values is a bit too fuzzy, right?
Using your term, but yes.
Yeah, sorry. And so, but it is being used, and I think the policymakers talk about value alignment, ethical alignment. When you really boil it down to what the data scientist or AI scientist is programming, it's I'm trying to optimize for higher accuracy, but I'm putting some constraints on it. So I want it to be highly accurate in determining and predicting, certain outcomes, but I want to make sure that its accuracy is as good on women as it is on men. And that's just a constraint that I can formalize, but it embodies a particular value that is important not to discriminate against men and women. So my point is there is a bridge between values, this fluffy discussion, and something which is constrained. And I think that's where we can have a concrete discussion about. And every society will need to decide, are you allowed to discriminate based on gender or age? I mean, insurance companies discriminate on age all the time. In some countries it's allowed, in some countries it's not, right? So there are cases where it's a human judgment and you need to constrain the AI. And so in that example, I can see a very clear path between values to something that data science can do technically. So will there be different types of models customized to different geographies? I think there will. I mean, when you look at language, I think there will be different offshoots of foundation models, or fundamentally different foundation models that train on different languages. And there'll be different filters, different toxicity filters. You already see it in different large language models, a trade-off between helpfulness and safety. Some models are so safe, they're not helpful at all. But some big tech companies are worried about the liability on that, right? So I think you will see that proliferation and that variety, and I don't think that's a bad thing.
So as states start to generate these AI models and push them, and there is an AI race in general, not just among the companies who are using them, but among the geographies that are pushing all of their own LLMs for valuable use cases that serve their region. How do we think that technology rivalry is going to play out? Maybe I start with Harry. How do you see this moving forward? Is it going to be rivalrous? Is it going to just be different companies pick the model that they want and carry on using it, so it's a free market system? Is this going to become geopolitical? Is it going to become politicized at some point?
I think that as we've seen in other areas of technology and advanced manufacturing, there's a bit of a reevaluation of what security and resilience look like in different kinds of geopolitical contexts. And I think that we're going to see, I hesitate to use the word rivalrous, but iterative approaches to these issue sets and value sets. And to call back to the nuclear proliferation comment, I think one of the better analogies from that kind of issue set would be in nuclear diplomacy and stability, where during the Cold War, one of the most important things that happened was ongoing discussions and conversations among rivals about how different kinds of actions and steps and technologies made each other feel. right? It was important to help each other understand were certain steps that we thought were signaling one thing actually perceived as signaling another thing altogether by other actors. And I think that that's going to be a really important component of our international processes, of the kinds of dialogue that we hope to see in the AI Safety Summit and other efforts going forward, is that, confirmation that we're using similar frames of reference and dispelling misperceptions when necessary. And that's going to be all the more critical as we get into this, I don't know, rivalrous, but iterative and differentiated dialogue of different kinds of values frameworks for this AI era.
And then that's going to be, I think, the conversation that's going to be played out for the next few years about how we iterate that approach. But some countries have chosen to opt out of the conversation. They're banning tools like ChatGPT, and there are legitimate concerns that they have, disinformation, concerns about deepfakes. But the approach to just ban things at the technology level is an interesting one. Ambassador Darling, any thoughts about, is that a viable way to stave off the problem?
I'm not sure bans are necessarily a viable way, but it does point to, I think, the massive divide on this technology. We already have a major digital divide globally, and I think we risk that being embedded and reinforced as we see the rollout of AI tools. I think AI, the values is important to the AI conversation because data is not valueless. There are certain populations, there are certain countries, there are certain demographics who are way overrepresented in the data, and that will skew the models that are used. We are seeing countries in the Pacific, countries in Southeast Asia who are underrepresented in digital data, and we will see that their access, their benefits to these tools will be far more limited as a result. So I do think we have an important conversation to have about how access to computing power, access to GPUs is relatively finite, is concentrated in largely a couple of countries, but a pretty small number of countries. And the data that we're drawing upon is heavily skewed to the developed world. So we will see AI models and their benefits accrue to countries with developed, digitized societies. And we risk at this point that many parts of the developing world will miss out, or they will only have access to the technology and the AI tools that haven't had the validation, aren't at that sort of premium tested level, in the same way that we see many countries in the developing world being absolutely smashed by ransomware attacks because they are using software or hardware that is affordable for their context and doesn't have security baked in. So I think we risk really repeating the same risk where we embed a digital divide with benefits accruing to the developed world, to countries like the US or Australia, and the risks accruing more heavily to the developing world.
Excellent, thank you for that. We've got 2 minutes and I want to ask a roundup question from everybody. Coming back to the very start. Ben, you said you're an optimist. After this conversation, firstly, are you still an optimist? And secondly, what one thing do you want to happen in 2024 for you to remain an optimist?
So definitely still an optimist. I think I'd be shooting myself in the leg if I wasn't. So, no choice there. But I think to be a bit more realistic, I think I hear a lot of conversations about trying to ban things, restrict access to AI chips, restrict access to computing power. To me, this is like burning books. I don't necessarily believe it restricts access to knowledge. I don't believe it restricts access to building technology or really doing what humans have always done, which is find ways around limitations, controls. I think we've tried banning many things in life, and I don't think, if we look back to MP3 sharing in the 2000s, I don't think anyone would call that a success, and that was significantly less important, I would suggest. So I think we have to move past a place of kind of discussing how we limit access, we prohibit, we blacklist, but how do we ensure that the guardrails are in place where things will inevitably go wrong? It's just a fact of life, but it isn't catastrophic. And if something does go awry, it can be reverted, course adjusted, etc. So that's kind of my leaving thought, I think, is basically how we maintain, support for this technology going forwards, but don't get to a place where we feel we have to ban.
Excellent, thank you. Feng, you said you're an optimist as well.
Yeah.
Are you still? And what needs to happen in 2024 for you to remain so?
Yeah, you know, technology goes through these hype cycles, these hype and fear at the same time, right? And that's what we're seeing with AI now. I co-founded my own
Particularly
startup.
at cybersecurity conferences, you see both the hype and the fear especially.
Yeah, it's a new experience for me. And you know, I founded my own AI startup 5 years ago when there was a previous AI hype cycle, and sometimes I'm a bit wary of these hype and fear cycles. And I really believe that software technology, AI, is going to be transformational, but the transformation will take place over 5-year, 8-year horizons, right? I remember in 2015 when we saw the first generative, adversarial networks and generative models. That was 7-8 years ago, right? So people think this stuff has come out of the woodwork, but it's been developed in the background. OpenAI has just done a great marketing effort. So I'm hoping for much more sober and concrete discussions around AI governance. There are impending horizontal legislation that the EU is going to roll out, other jurisdictions are going to roll out. What does it mean practically for us to test and evaluate? There's a big gap. I talk to policymakers, and they say, put in place good governance measures. I talk to the data scientists, they're like, what the hell do you want me to do? I have no idea. Like, tell me, and I'm happy to do it. And so there's this
code in your values.
Right. So there's that gap, between high-level discussion on values versus what can I actually code and do in my day-to-day work. And I think the more we have sober discussions about that, then a lot of this hype fear goes away, and we move forward constructively.
Thanks, Harry.
I think that I'm almost ready to code the rules-based international order in Python. I'm almost there. But I think that still an optimist, but I think Brendan made this fantastic point about how if we don't take affirmative action to build the values and future and trajectory into this new era that we want to see in the world, then the benefits of AI will just accrue to the advanced Anglophone incumbents that it's predisposed to accrue to already. And we want to see an AI-driven future that is inclusive, that has equitable growth at its core, that drives forward sustainable development goals. And we need to build that in. We need to stack the deck in favor of that, or else it leaves a vacuum into which other values will flow, whether it's the skewed data and training that is underpinning these models, or it's competing frameworks that aren't consistent with the values we want to see in the world. So it'll take action on our part, and that's what I hope to see in 2024. But I remain cautiously optimistic that that will happen.
Excellent. Ambassador Darling, last one's for you.
I think I'll hedge and say I'm on the fence between pessimism and optimism. If we look out to October 2024 and we're all back in this room having a conversation about the implications of cybersecurity for AI, and if in the intervening 12 months all we've seen is the continued rush to market, the continued release of models at the pace we're seeing in the upcoming phase, our government task force has not settled on anything useful. Our parliament's not ready to do anything in terms of regulation, and we have a whole heap of international forums where we're getting together and talking. I think unless we can shift the balance to action, to accountability, to conversations where we can gather between government, industry and other stakeholders and say, okay, well, actually the research has advanced in this time, we have kept up with the state of the science, we have had that openness, and we are now more informed, better understanding of where the risks are and how to mitigate them. That feels to me like a really potentially positive future, but I wouldn't bet my house on that being where we are in 12 months.
Sobering thought, but I guess the last word is actually for the audience themselves. And I urge you guys to, as you step out of the room, think about that question yourselves. Are you an optimist? Are you a pessimist? Are you a catastrophist? What do you need to happen? What do you need to do in 2024 to make the future that you want to see happen in this era of generative AI come true? And I hope to see you all 12 months from now in this room again, discussing the same topic, hopefully with more optimism and with some concrete action. But thank you very much for your time, and thank you all.
Thank you all. Thank you very much for the brilliantly engaging discussion. Once again, let's give it up for our moderator as well. Thank you so much, Mr. Kurdi, for moderating this segment. Thank you, panelists. Please proceed and be seated. Thank you, off stage. Thank you very much. All right, so folks, just a gentle reminder, if you do need to rewatch this segment again, it is available to rewatch at your convenience. All right, so where can you watch this? Simply head on over to the YouTube and type in Singapore International Cyber Week, and you will be able to rewatch this instantly right now. All right, so our next segment, ladies and gentlemen, will start at 4 p.m. sharp, and the title is The Cyber Attribution Conundrum. A sharp sword, or is it a blunt blade? So we'll wait you in the studio at 4 p.m. See you. Thank you.